and welcome to North Lanarkshire Council's online visual arts programme. My name is Jasmine and I'll be teaching you for the next 5 weeks. Our theme is Blast into Nature with these longer and brighter days of spring. Now we've got some great ideas and activities to share with you, so let's get our messy clothes on and let's get started. So this week we're going to be doing summer botanicals. We're going to be using watercolour for this, and this is loosely inspired by the Victorian botanical illustrations that you might have seen. Lots of places use them, like Kew Gardens and things like that, in their books. And also a famous illustrator, Katie Scott, she also uses them in her books as a sort of style for her. If you want to look her up, her stuff is really cool. She's got a book called Botanicum, and it's kind of a bit different, but this is a good introduction into the genre of watercolours for botanicals. So this week, what we'll need for our activity, we'll need some watercolour paint. This is quite an inexpensive palette, and it comes with this lid that I use as a palette for mixing my paints. There's some water for your watercolours, some paper just to test out your colours, for just so you're not testing things out directly on your artwork. Some brushes. You'll need a variety of sizes. Now these are quite small, and I think that they work quite well just for this because it's quite detailed. These bigger brushes are for our warm-up activity, and for the watercolour, for the sketching part, we're going to need a 2H pencil or something similarly light, some pens for our warm-up, charcoal if you fancy it, and some masking tape just to tape your painting down. I tend to find that it's much easier if your paper doesn't slide around, so we're going to tape it down today. So for our warm-up activity, we're going to use a sketchbook. Now we made one last week. If you don't have that and you just want to use some loose paper, then that's totally fine too. I'm going to use this sketchbook. This was my example last week. I think it's quite nice just to keep everything in one place, so I'm going to use this. So we're going to be doing some watercolour insects, and this is just quite a fun warm-up. No pressure at all. It doesn't have to look good or anything like that. It's just a bit of fun. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take one of my bigger brushes, get it quite wet in the water there, and I'm just going to pick blue. Now it's totally random choice, so use whatever colour you fancy. I'm just going to make a big blob. If you want to make this a little bit more fun, you could close your eyes while you're doing it, because it really doesn't matter what these shapes are. Maybe use some red, why not? And just whatever size and shape you fancy, and mix that red with a blue, make some purple. Now this brush is quite, I think it's quite well used, so it isn't very exact, but that's kind of perfect for what we're doing at the moment, because it's not really important that it's specific. Alright, so you've got your blobs, and the good thing about watercolour is it dries quite quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pen or charcoal and have a look at these blobs. Now, I know it's a bit difficult as an adult, because when you're a kid everything looks like something in your imagination, but as an adult things are sometimes a little bit trickier to turn into something else. But I want you to have a look at these blobs and think, if it was an insect, where would my wings go? Where would my antenna go? Do I have stripes? So for this one, I think this one's actually quite good because it looks like it might have a head here. So I'm going to give it some wings. There's a little eye. It's a blue bumblebee apparently. Okay, and here's some antennae and some feet. And if you want to maybe turn this one, this sort of looks like a nose. I might just make an imaginary insect or a bird. There we go, there's a bird. This could be a big fat bumblebee. Now, I don't know what bumblebee I've seen recently, it doesn't look like one to me, but that's okay. And this one, I think I'm going to make it into Sometimes these can be a little bit scary looking if you don't spend too long on them, but that's okay. So yeah, so then maybe make this one into another little creature. So maybe insects was a loose term. But that's a good warm up just to get your imagination going and to get you thinking about how the watercolour paints work as well. Alright, so pop your sketchbook to one side. Now, with your botanical illustration, as I said, you can print out the templates from our link in the video. Now, I traced this without anything particularly fancy. What I did was I taped my lighter, well I taped this to a window and then taped paper over the top of it and sketched it so you could see the lines, and I sketched it much lighter. You might not even be able to see this on the camera. You want to sketch it lightly just so that it doesn't show through your watercolour paints. That's one of the great things about watercolour, is that it's really transparent and it has a lot of nice qualities, but it does mean that your pencil line needs to be quite light. So I've just traced the very basic shapes. You can see that this doesn't have much detail on it at all, but it does have little dashes where we're going to then put these names of the plants and a title if you'd like it. It's all optional because it is your artwork at the end of the day, but that's what I decided to do. I also made some little marks at the corners and in the middle of all the sides, just so if you, once you've finished your painting, if you want to frame it or put it somewhere and you want it to be A4 when you finish, or just to crop it at that edge, then you can use a ruler to cut it, and that gives you your guides there. Alright, so what we're going to do, I'm going to take this one that was traced a little bit lighter and I'm going to tape it down. Now you'll want to use watercolour paper for this, because there's going to be a lot of water involved with the paint. The paper, there's a chance that it'll wrinkle, and to stop that you want to use a thicker paper, better quality paper that you could maybe get at an art shop, just to hold that paint a little bit more securely and on a flat surface. So I'm just going to tape that down. If you want to be really thorough, you can put tape along all of the edges, the full length, but as this is just an example for me to show you and I don't intend on framing it, I'm just going to tape it down lightly. Alright, so once you've got it taped down, I want you to have a look at what you've got and think what would be best to tackle first. So in my mind, I tend to tackle one colour at a time because it's much easier to move around the painting and sort of almost colour by numbers, because it's much easier for you to sort of tick things off in your mind. So I'm going to mix some yellow green, and it's quite good. So I'm right-handed. I'll start on the left-hand side just so that I'm not smudging my paint. If you'd like to do it differently and your brain just doesn't work in that logical way, believe me, when I did my example, I didn't do it that way, but I realised in hindsight I really should have. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side and work around in a circle, and that way it gives your paint time to dry. So this is quite a small brush. I'm going to mix some dark green and some yellow. The good thing about these palettes is they have a lot of really nice colours already. You don't have to do too much extra mixing. You can buy watercolour paints that are in tubes, so they're already wet, but I find this a lot more affordable and sort of easier to work with. And it's already dry, so it can't dry out. Alright, so you'll want to start with a very wet brush, as I said, and if you can see a big drip on the end of your brush like I just saw, get rid of it. So you want to start filling in your shapes, and it'll be really light at first, but it gives you the opportunity to decide how dark you'd like it as you go. So just keep loading that paintbrush up with some paint. And you'll see the nice thing about watercolour is that because you're adding it with such a wet brush, the colour will start to gather in certain points of the areas that you paint, and it makes a really lovely texture. Alright, so we know how to do the green bits now, and once these are dry I can then show you how to do your texture over the top, but I'm just going to show you how to do the bits of the flowers now because there's a nice few details that I want to show you. So for your foxglove, which is this one, we want it to be pink. Now if you want to do a totally crazy one where everything's not the right colour, then go for it, but I'm just going to show you this example so you can get an idea. Alright, so again we're starting pale and we're starting with a wet brush. So just block in the whole shape, don't worry about them being different flowers because this is a clump of flowers here, so we can add things like tone later. Now the nice thing about foxgloves is that they have a lot of different patterns on them and they're quite an interesting shape as well. So once that's dry we'll build up some pattern and texture on it. A nice thing to do with watercolour is while it's still wet, add a little bit of extra paint and you can see how it forms little drops of darker colour. Just a nice touch and nod to the material. And it also is a nice way to add tone to your piece so that you can see your flowers separate from each other. It does get a little bit more difficult to see your pencil lines once you've added your paint on top, but it's not impossible, you can see them, promise. So, while that's drying, just fill in these little ones. You can see how you really have to go to town with the water with watercolours. It's called watercolours for a reason. So you can see how this paper is already bubbling up, so definitely tape it down. And while we're waiting for that to dry, I'll show you your texture on your foxglove leaves. So I'm just mixing a little bit of blue into the green, just to make it that bit darker and a little bit more clear that it's texture and not the leaf itself. So foxgloves have these lovely little bubbly leaves. So feel free to interpret that any way you like. I just put it down one side of the leaf to keep it from being a bit too similar to the raspberries. But that's just personal preference. It's really up to yourself what you want to do. If you spend a bit more time on it, you can really get some tone in there, decide how dark you want these leaves. I've made them quite a bit darker on my example, but I admittedly spent a bit longer fussing over it, which I think you tend to do on the first try of something. Alright. And we'll just add some tone to our foxglove itself. So you just want it to be a bit more dark pink. So I already have some pink on this white here, just because I've mixed it, and watercolour tends to do that if you add a lot of paint on top. So red, white, and a little bit more red, I would say, for your tone. Make sure that your brush is wet again. And you just want to go around where you would see a shadow. Make your plants come to life. And you can make that bleed out with just a little bit of water on top. You can see that it's going into the rest of your colour there. There's just one at the bottom that I think I've missed. Yep. And sometimes it's nice to just do a little, almost like an outline where the edge of that would be. So foxglove flowers sort of taper out at the bottom. They're great flowers for bees. There we go. And maybe just a wee tiny bit more on your front facing one. Alright. You can definitely take a little bit longer on this than I am, and make sure that you're happy with it. And once you are, you can just let that dry. We'll go back to our foxgloves now and just add a little bit of texture on the inside. So I'm just adding a little bit of blue to the purple that we mixed for the crocus, just to make it distinctly different from the pink. And I think that is really the colour. It's usually like a purple, dark purple on the normal, the natural flowers itself. So we'll just go in and just copy my example here so I can show you the way I'd want it. So they tend to get more spotty the further that you go into the flower, and the spots get smaller. So you can have some bigger ones on the edge and some smaller ones on the inside. Like that. And you can see that I also, in this example, have used the purple to use as sort of a tone. So I would just really dry off that brush a little bit more. Take some of the paint. Just make sure it's not as wet as it normally would be and won't bleed into your other colour. And just add some subtle stripes. And since this one's a little bit lighter on top, I'll just mix it in a little bit with the pink. You can see that that's quite hard to see at the moment. I think that's just because the paint is still a little bit wet. But I'm just going to add a little bit of tone with this purple to show you where I would put it, to give that sort of 3D look on your foxglove flower. Alright. So you can see how if you built up your paint colours over the top of what you've already got, you would end up with something like this. Now, I spent a long time on this, maybe over an hour, but I'm just wanting to show you how the techniques work and things like that here. So hopefully this has given you a good enough idea of how to get started. I'm going to show you how to do the text on it now, just to kind of give you an idea of something that you could do, but please don't take it as a rule, you can do whatever you like. So with my 2H pencil, I'm going to practice writing the names first, because spelling is sometimes not your, it's not always your strong suit on a final piece of artwork, so I'm going to practice writing crocus, raspberry bush. The P is always missing in some sometimes when I write it. Foxglove. Alright, so that's our spelling. Let's keep that where we can see it. So I'm going to very lightly write crocus and try and get it in the middle of that dotted line. Don't worry if it's not, you can rub it out and do it again. Raspberry bush. And that's still wet, so I'm not going to write that on it just now. And then up here, I've written my title Summer Botanicals, so we'll just write that on again. If your handwriting isn't, if you don't tend to like your handwriting, you can do it in block capitals if you prefer. It's totally up to yourself. Alright, so I used brown for this. You could use black, you could use Indian ink if you'd prefer. I quite like how the brown looks with the other colours. So try and get quite a thick consistency, not too watery, relatively opaque. Alright, so there's your brown. And just lightly trace your writing. I'm going quite quickly because I've done this a couple of times, but take it as slow as you need, because there's nothing worse than your last step being the thing that trips you up. And once you've got your text to the colour and how dark you would like it, and gone over it as many times as you like, you can rub out your dotted lines underneath, like I've done in the example. You can see if you just go in with a bit more water, it becomes a bit more, it's a bit harder to control, but that'll be darker. Alright, so once you're finished and it's dry, you can untape your work from the table, and you could trim it down using these dashes that we spoke about, with a ruler and a craft knife, but it's entirely up to you. I tend to like doing them on larger paper so that you can sort of decide after you've done it how big you want it, but that's pretty much our activity for today, so thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.